Hiring excellence really is about optimizing your processes, your people, rallying around the whole team around this mission, right? Which is to really attract and hire really, really talented people over the long term.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. Your host, Shannon Ogborn, interviews top talent acquisition leaders, uncovering their secrets to building and leading successful recruiting teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm Shannon Ogborn, your host, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious recruiting teams from seed to IPO and beyond. I am stoked to be here with Reggie Williams, who has an incredible background in recruiting, started as an IC recruiter, quickly moved up to management. He brings years of experience in leading and advising recruiting teams. He was, in fact, a recruiting manager in the hypergrowth stage of Airbnb, and now has the role of advising portfolio companies on recruiting best practices as the head of tech TA at Bain Capital. Reggie has a lot of great content out there on LinkedIn, which has landed him as a recruiting top voice on the platform. Reggie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about everything recruiting.
Amazing. Me too. And you bring the same hype energy I do. We always love that.
Do it.
Well, to give the audience a little bit of background on yourself, can you tell us a little bit about your role, your current role at Bain?
Yeah, so excited. I've been 2 years at Bain Capital Ventures. So work within the venture capital side of Bain. Really, my main role is to help founders to build out their early recruiting strategy and processes. So as we make the investments, I think a key piece after getting the money is figuring out, okay, how do I hire the right people? And so that's where me and my team come in, and I work closely with William, who's a sourcer on my team, and we help them build out their recruiting practices. So sourcing, interviewing, compensation, and then we also help introduce candidates into their company that might be a good fit from our network. So we're constantly looking for great people and then matching them into our portfolio companies.
Nice. And I feel like working with VCs definitely gives a really broad perspective on what's going on in the market. What would you say is one of the major challenges you face in your recruiting career, especially in the world of recruiting today while you're working with all of these portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, tech recruiting in general is always, it's like a puzzle you're trying to solve, and you think you have something solved and you have it right, and then the market switches. I would say, like, even in today's environment where there's a lot of candidates out there who are available because of the layoffs or just what's going on in the macroeconomy, I think you still find it very, challenging and competitive to hire and close those really amazing candidates, right? That we know the best candidates on the market, they're always going to have offers. They're always going to be highly compensated. And so I think it's really still important for founders to, just figure out, like, what is their magic sauce in terms of closing, having the right candidate experience, doubling down on that. I think going into 2024 is going to be important because, again, the best candidates aren't going to be accepting like anything. You're going to have to still, showcase why your roles are interesting, why your company is growing even more so, I think, in this environment to kind of prove out like who's really going to win in this environment. So I think, offer acceptance remains kind of still a key kind of metric that companies are optimizing for, even since I've been in the industry and even now.
Definitely. And I don't know about you, but I also feel like people, after all of these layoffs have occurred, are really expecting more of companies, and they're really vetting companies a lot more than they ever were previously. So although there's a lot of candidates in the market, the persuasion factor is more relevant than ever.
Yeah, I think like the bar has kind of gone up a little bit on kind of what people are looking for. I mean, on every side, whether it's culture, whether it's flexibility, right? And the way people are working, or it's benefits, or it's the opportunity and kind of freedom people get in the role. I think you have to kind of up your game on all these factors. Even though people are out in the market, I think they're even kind of choosier on where they go next because they don't want to get into that same boat that they were just in, right? And so, like, how are you going to kind of prove that you're different? And then obviously the fundamentals have to be right with the business, which is always important.
Definitely. Well, let's think about why offer acceptance rate is so important. Let's chat about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Offer acceptance rate is a key metric for most recruiting teams. It's been a key metric for all the recruiting teams that I've been on. Why is that?
That's that's a good question. And I think, partly, so first I want to define offer acceptance because I think it can get, there's even a trap, I think, with calculating it. So most people would see offer acceptance as offers accepted over offers extended. But I think what you really want is offers accepted over offers completed offer decisions, right? Because if you include all offers extended, then you're also including pending, which can be a little bit of a trap, especially with your smaller stage and you have like 4 offers, right? And 2 are pending. Right. You don't want to include those as part of your offer accept metric. But then I think once you figure out what, have the right data, figure out the right calculation, then it's really about like, why is offer acceptance important? I think the reality is it's a key indicator for a lot of things. I think one is your kind of place in the market, right? Kind of how you're positioned against other companies. If you're losing people at a high rate, right? That's kind of an early signal or warning sign that like something's up, whether it be your compensation bands or your pitch as a company or your internal processes might be off, right? And so you want to kind of maintain a high, kind of relatively high offer accept rate to make sure that those things are clicking, those things are working. And kind of a lower offer accept rate could be a kind of a signal that something's wrong, right? And I think earlier stage you are, right? You're kind of accepting that you're going to have probably a lower accept rate, right? Because of brand and, the opportunity might be lower cash and you're going against other. But I think, still thinking about the offer accept rate is important. I think the other factor is for larger recruiting teams, it's really a morale issue as well. Once you get to a certain stage, I think that's often overlooked, right? Like,
it's soul crushing. It is soul crushing when someone rejects your offer.
It is. And I think that as a recruiter, it's important to come and feel motivated and like you have a good chance of closing each and every candidate you see. And if that's not the case, then that hurts your team, that hurts everyone individually. So I think certainly like when I was a manager, we looked at offer accept rate as also a way of, really, really thinking about the team and how the team might be feeling. Because if you have lower than a coin flip chance of getting a candidate, you're probably going to be demotivated to give that next offer, right? You're climbing uphill. You're climbing an uphill battle already. And so if something's wrong, it's important to at least address the issues, not necessarily like you want to see a doubling of the offer accept rate overnight. It should be that you're working on some of those key issues that are affecting the offer accept rate so that you don't fall into a repeated cycle of low offer accept rates over time. And we know quarter by quarter that might change, but overall, you want to make sure you're increasing that over time.
Yeah, and the data doesn't tell you the full story, right? Like you have to look at the data and identify that there is an issue. And then it's up to you to identify the issue, the root of it, outside of the data. The data is not going to come to you and say, hey, you have a 60% offer acceptance rate. It's because you're not pitching the role right. That's on you. So you have to use the data as a starting point and then kind of filter in from there. But I know a lot of people will ask, like, what is a good offer acceptance rate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, depending on your stage, it's you're going to go for a different benchmark. But I would say like when I was in-house, 75 to 85% sounds about where we want to be. You might fluctuate between there. Obviously, you want to get 90, 95%, obviously great. But, once you drop below 75%, I think it should really set off an alarm bell of, okay, what is happening here? What, again, like getting that story. And I think hopefully you're collecting those decline reasons and actually going deeper with each candidate. And hopefully we get into this, but once you get the decline, I think you can't just accept that like, oh, we lost a candidate. Okay, go your way. Like really working with each candidate or understanding, why wasn't this offer accepted? What were your other offers that you were considering? How did we rank in those? Like, were we second best? Were we like lower on the list? Can give you real insight into what it looks like, not only on the cash front, but also the opportunity front, right? How managers are selling in the opportunity, company perspective on, did they see the vision of what we were trying to do? So I think that really takes some digging in, into what is actually happening. But I think once again, like 75, 85%, if you're lower, that might be an issue. Also, like, I don't know if you want 100% accept rate. This might be like a hot take, but I feel like you're closing every candidate. Like you're leaving something on the table. Like maybe your compensation bands might be too high, or like, there might be other things that you might need to rein in. I think an opportunity, like I think there's a healthy decline rate in which you're getting, you're allowing people to kind of opt into the opportunity versus like blowing every offer out of the water and getting a high accept rate. So obviously you have it, it's great, but it's like looking into that, saying why is important too. But 75 to 85%, I would say.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that take on the healthy decline rate. One, because I feel like there's something to be learned from every decline. Like you're saying, if you're not getting the rationale, then you can't learn from the situation. And there's going to be times where it was completely out of your control. Someone may have simply just beat you on compensation and it wasn't something that you could have ever made moves or changed. Then there's other times where it's something that you could have said better or they could have understood better that would have changed their mind. And then at that point, it's like a little bit too late to backtrack. So yeah, it's definitely important to dig in, understand why, get the high level reasoning so that you can report on it, especially if you're a large organization. Then you also have that feasibility to dig in if it's something like really niche or specific.
Yeah. I think even looking by role, by function can get good insights, right? Is this a company-wide thing that's happening? Is it particular to our end function or our design function? Can give you good insights into like what the issue might be if you're experiencing a low accept rate. But having kind of that broader picture is important. But I think the data is important, but then the story behind the data is super important too.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear your take on this as well. Hiring managers, well, let's just backtrack. Interviewing is not always super intuitive, and selling a candidate is not always super intuitive. What matters to you, the hiring manager, may not matter to the candidate. And so I think that there needs to be a lot more coaching on how we can get hiring managers to, have fruitful discussions that are focused on what the candidate's needs are.
Yeah. I think, and maybe it starts with the recruiting team in terms of really understanding the motivations of the candidate, right? And, my early conversations with the candidate are almost all about, once I know they're a good fit for the role, it's really then I go into what is going to motivate you to make a move, right? And can you even stack rank? Like, what are the most important priorities for you as you look for a new role? So that when I go into the interview process, I can kind of hand that off to the next person and kind of like tell that story, right? Like that starts the story. Because if if someone really cares about the team and the people, that's a very different sell than, the technical challenges and the new innovative technology that you're using. So like I would treat those types of people very differently in my pitch, right? And even how we set up interviews, like maybe I'll include a different interviewer in that lunch than I would if I knew that they were, really interested in technical. Maybe I pick someone that's more on the cutting edge side of what we're doing for that. Or maybe I'll tell the manager, hey, like make sure to mention how you're leveraging, one of the latest the technologies, in order to, create your product, right? And so I think leveraging the motivations and understanding that deeply in the beginning is super important. And then how we kind of enable the hiring manager to kind of now sell the pitch and kind of personalize it for each person becomes super important too.
100%. And now I know we've talked about a little bit previously about the timing, the art of the cadence of giving an offer. Tell me your thoughts on that, because that's I feel like an interesting concept that not everybody practices.
Yeah, I think, definitely an art. That's the first thing you kind of explained it right. Like, this is where the fun comes in as a recruiter, right? We got into it where it's not a plug and play, plug this into a model and spit out when I should give an offer. But I think as I thought about it, first is understanding the timeline of the candidate early is super important. So like even throughout the whole process, but where are they at in the overall search? How are they cadencing their interviews? Do they have something that they're excited about that they're just starting? Or are they kind of near the edge and they have offers in hand? Like that's a very different situation. And so when I think about, how to time offers, I really start to think about, okay, what does each individual's candidate timeline look like? And then, as a general principle, my guideline is I try not to deliver an offer if the candidate cannot make a decision within a week of delivering the offer. And I know some people are even tighter within a few days, but I think for me, what I try to give an appropriate amount of time for each candidate, but also don't want an offer to be out there for a month without hearing. And I would venture to guess the more time an offer is out there without an acceptance, probably the high rate of decline of those offers.
I think that's actually a proven. I can't necessarily quote the research on that, but I have seen that before, where the longer an offer is out, the longer or the less likely it is that the person will accept. And that's not to say that the person doesn't know that that's where it's headed. It just means that you haven't formally, physically sent the offer, because you also want the candidate to be able to evaluate all of their offers together so that they can make the best informed decision for themselves.
Absolutely. And I think that is the end goal, right? Is that you're putting your offer on the plate at the right, in the right time where they're able to really consider all their options and then make the best decision. Now, some candidates are very transparent in the beginning. They say clearly, like, I want to see all the interview processes through. But we also have have candidates that say, hey, like, if you give me the right offer, like, I'm willing to forgo the other interviews, right? And I think that may be opportunity to actually go early and kind of, or maybe even, think about the best offer you can up front, so you can kind of preempt them from interviewing at other companies. Certainly, like, I think that's a strategy, but you have to be really clear with the candidate on where they're at. Are they willing to forego those opportunities? And for what would they be willing to do that for, before, I think, just giving a blind offer and just hoping for the best, where now you're waiting and, taking time. Also, I wouldn't, if you're waiting to deliver an offer, that's not dead time. That's great time to set up sell calls, to, have the person come in for, a few hours and talk with the team and connect. And I think that's very worthwhile time, where you're still staying top of mind with the candidate. Because the other part is, like, you don't want to go too long with that. Now the other companies are impressing them. They forget about you. So I think using that time wisely is important, but certainly, like, timing it so that they're ready to make a decision within, I would say, a week, but some people will say even shorter.
Yeah, it is always an interesting strategy wise. When I was working at Google, we had a ton of people who got competing offers way before we were able to get an offer into them, or before they could even interview. So it's, there's always the strategy element. For some companies, it's going to be, okay, we know we're competing against X company.
Right.
You have 2 days to decide and you have to forego those interviews. And some companies are a little bit more flexible. And so I think, the hiring manager probably dictates that a lot more than the recruiting team does, but it is definitely strategy oriented based on the individual candidate for sure. Let's just shift to chatting a little bit about what are some tangible ways people can get a higher offer acceptance? Like, what are some of the ways that you have coached your team in the past that leads to higher offer acceptance rates?
So I think we talked about some of the pieces, right? Which is, the first part for me is understanding the motivations of each candidate up front, being transparent as possible about the opportunity. So if you have, candidates who, this opportunity isn't right for them based on the compensation or based on other factors, kind of pre-selecting those people out, right? I think a lot of companies will try to mask some of the maybe more, not so savory things about their company or about their offer with each candidate. But to me, like, put those things out in front and have people select in. I remember at Airbnb, we had one of our leaders come in and start talking about how in the beginning, when they were searching, they would talk about how hard the role is going to be, like how difficult it's going to be, how much, what the ugly parts of the role will be. And this is like a mountain we're trying to climb. And if you're not down for the winds and the snow and the tough times, like, this is not for you. And I think there's power in, obviously you want to paint, a fair picture of the company, but I would even start with, like, hey, this is not an easy thing to do. And that will hopefully select in the right people to the company who already are leaning into those areas. And that's what you wanted on the job anyway, right? Not someone who's going to come in and think, oh, like, this is, I'm not ready for this. So I think
then you have turnover, and then you have to hire again. Like,
it's
not worth it.
It's not. You see that, I think you see that a bunch with people who, and I think it's oftentimes the hiring manager may not be exactly clear on what they need, or the recruiting team did a more of, again, like the rosy picture sell. So it just wasn't what they expected. And I think, I always try to paint a fair picture of the role, but also, hey, like, this is going to be hard. And then I think, like, really, as we think about motivations of the candidate, there are a lot of things that are not said that a candidate's not going to come out and explicitly say, hey, like, I'm in it for the comp. Like, this is not going to.
Although some do.
Some do. No, you will get the odd person to say, hey, like, I need this. And like, that's what it is. Like, totally get it. Yeah. And I like to, that's refreshing sometimes when you get that. But I think oftentimes people are a little bit more like, I don't want to like seem like I'm just about the comp or just about that. But you can tell based on their answers what type of things they're optimizing for. So like one of the examples I think of is when I'm talking with a candidate early on, they might mention why their past role. One question I always ask is, what didn't work in your past role and why, essentially why you're leaving, but really like what wasn't the right setup in your last role. And so they might mention something like, I didn't have the freedom I wanted to deliver the goal against the goal, or my organization didn't prioritize in the right way. Well, like, I think I'm not going to ask them to like, as that explicit motivation. I'm just going to note that as a motivation in their next role. Because I could bet that they're probably going to optimize for freedom and,
because they're changing roles. They're not going to want to put themselves in the same situation. Another one I feel like I've heard a lot is about silos. People are like, well, I felt too siloed in my, in my most recent role, and I'm really looking for like a more collaborative experience. And some companies just are not built that way, especially for certain roles. And so if that's not something you can offer, then you're able to tell the candidate, and it saves the candidate so much time. It saves you so much time. It saves the team so much time. And all that adds up to a lot in the end.
Yeah. And I think, again, it avoids some of those problems later down the road where like maybe they're the process, they didn't hear about the company being very siloed, and now they're like going to decline the offer, and now they wasted time interviewing, right? Or they come into the company, as we mentioned, which is the worst case. They come into the company, realize it's siloed, and then leave, and you have to restart the search. So I think like just getting in front of that to be realistic about what is your opportunity, because it's not for everyone. The reality is like, it's not for everyone. Like every company isn't for everyone at every time, right? And I think about, what my role is with companies is really hiring the right person at the right time for the right role. Because you can there are great people that are generally good, but they're just not a fit for your company at this point in your company's life cycle. But they could be a great fit once you grow, or vice versa. Like they could have been great when you were building, but now that you scaled, they're just not that person that you need. So, and then the thing with in the right role, you might actually have really good people at the right time in your company, but they're just not in the right role to be successful. And I've had that happen a bunch with people transferring, to a different team and just suddenly being a high performer. And I think you have to be really realistic with like, what is the right position for the company, for each person inside the company. And that might not be their current role, but I think it's important to explore that at least before like making any decisions on someone, for sure.
100%. And it sounds like a lot of this is, falls back onto active listening, kind of deciphering motivations, what's said and what's not said. What are some tangible practices you use to really enhance your active listening?
So I've done a lot of like trainings on this early, especially as a manager in my career, because I think oftentimes as someone who plays more of a coach, I'm not trying to just give answers, right? Typically, I'm trying to steer someone into the right direction. And I think as recruiters, we're kind of the same way, right? Like we're not dictating someone into a role, or we don't have direct influence over the manager, but we kind of act as coaches. So I think with both internally into the candidate, active listening is super important. And so a few of the tangible things that I do, and may not work for everyone, but things that I do, like really, I think initially going to the conversation, just giving up my agenda. Like, so even if I'm a call with the candidate and it's about to deliver an offer or getting into like a compensation conversation, at first I'll just connect with the person as an individual in the world. How are you doing today? Like, what's going on for you? I think not only does that like ground people and build a connection, but it kind of creates a little bit of space for me to get insight into what they're going through at that moment. Like maybe I think, they just ran from another call and they're just getting there. And so they need some time to decompress. I may actually offer, hey, do you want to grab some water? Do you want to use the restroom? I know you've been rushing. That I can't tell you how many times that has built so much connection with the candidate. The fact that I just like asked a question based on what they, how they answered my initial questions. And now they knew that I was listening and kind of understanding and was empathetic to them. So like initially just like giving away an agenda, connecting with people as individuals is the first piece. And I think as you're listening, really reflecting back, and I think this is like a 101 of active listening, but reinterpreting what they said and kind of like restating what they said, but in a way that shows you grasp what they were saying, not exactly like mimicking like a parrot, but being able to like interpret what they said and kind of internalize that for you and making sure that that's correct, right? So someone shares kind of their key motivations of like, oh, okay, like it's great to listen to. It seems like you're optimizing for this, and this is how you would rank them. And this is because of your past experiences. And they're like, yeah, like that's right. And I think just you doing that shows that you were listening, but also allows the candidate some time to like correct that, right? So they can say, hey, like actually that there's one more thing there, or that's not quite what I meant about, this particular piece. And that's helped me to really dive deeper again, it's all about getting deeper into motivations and
well, you don't want to get far along into the process and have been confused about something they said that they meant. And I think there's a lot of times where a candidate will say something and they're like, okay, well, actually redo. I actually did not mean it in that way. What I meant was this. And so when you reiterate, it actually, like you said, gives them that space to amend, how it came off and how it was perceived. And I actually think it helps set the candidate up for success for later conversations, because if they're talking to the hiring manager or someone else who won't give them the space to amend, then they've already practiced that, that talk track.
Yeah. They kind of cemented in their own minds about what they actually meant. So the next time they're more likely to actually give the true intent of what they were saying and making sure that came through. So you're kind of allowing them that kind of time to cement that. That's a great point too, for sure.
Yeah, and talk to me about this. We've talked about the concept of just kind of like stepping back, letting the candidate talk it out for themselves.
Yeah, this is so important.
Kind of like inner monologue sort of thing.
You know what? So I think the last point about listening is just let the candidate talk. Like even, accept pauses at moments just to get them, get them the space, because people want to fill that space. And oftentimes, like I've had candidates actually talk themselves into an offer, except because they were refuting their own kind of concerns around the role because I just let them talk and I was just showing that I was listening. But yeah, I think, the more you can not interrupt the flow of thinking, the more you'll allow the candidate to kind of like work through some of those concerns themselves even before you interject. You find like that you may actually not resonate with what they're saying, or you might misheard them. But if you allow them to kind of just continue to talk, and I think I wrote this in a post, but like if I leave a conversation and I did 90% of the talking, I know something was wrong. Something was off. Like that's more than likely a decline, because the hope is that it's at least evenly split between the candidate talking and kind of you sharing. You don't want to be, again, that means you were probably like trying to sell, rather than the candidate actually exploring the opportunity for themselves. So just something to think about, I think, as you're in conversation. I try to monitor this too, of like, okay, how much space am I giving the candidate to talk? Have they really got out anything? Or do we have to ask one more question to allow them to kind of go deeper and talk more? So, and not everyone's talking, especially in engineering space. Like you get engineers who are like more straightforward and to the point, and that's okay. But I think just making sure that they're able to really work through, again, all their thought processes is so important too.
Yeah, honestly, sometimes I feel like the more a recruiter talks, the more doubt they can put in a candidate's mind. Where it's just like, if you just like, if they have follow-up questions, or you're listening to those things unsaid that you think there's commentary that you can provide that will clear up a certain understanding of something they're really interested in. But otherwise, it's like, okay, let's just cut. It's not my time to speak anymore. The candidate's on their way to making a choice. And if there's something that I know is relevant, then I can bring that up. Otherwise, like, let's just hear them, instead of getting on a sell call and being like, here's our benefits. And it's like, I don't care about, like, I know that's not what, like, not a top priority. And for a lot of people it is, but just as an example, closing is interesting. And I think what I would be curious what you think about this. There's a lot of people who relate recruiting to sales, and I do think there is a little bit of overlap, but I think what's different about it is that in sales, you're going like company to company in like kind of a traditional SaaS model. But in recruiting, you are doing company to human. This is like someone's human, real life, where they're going to spend a majority of their days and time. What do you think about that?
It's a good kind of question. I think you're right that the stakes are a lot higher for recruiting in a way. I mean, people spend a third of their lives at work, minimum.
Yeah, right.
Like these working 8 hours. I think also it's such an intimate decision because you're trying to help someone make a pretty big life decision after like maybe talking with them for a few hours, if that, with each candidate. And so like I think the amount of time you need to spend building the relationship and really understanding their life situation is so much, it's a lot different than it trying to understand someone's like business model and how this product might add incremental value.
Right.
If you approach recruiting that way, you're not going to do well because people make semi-rational decisions, but oftentimes making a career decision is so complex in terms of not just a compensation decision, but it's a life decision. It might involve many people in your life that are close to you. It's a brand thing of like, how do you want your personal brand to look? So when you're making this decision, it's not just, does this meet will this help me meet my like cost goals for the year or like help my team incrementally, grow by 10%. It's, how does this role play a part in the story of my life? And I think the mentality you need as a recruiter, then becomes a lot more, I think, nuanced and complex than simply like giving me sales. Although I think there's some like similar things apply, right? It's when you look at the macro, it is a very like volume driven thing, right? You need it's a funnel. It's a prospecting to, pass through rate. Like I think things like that. Yeah. But then once you kind of get closer to the like actual day-to-day interactions with people, you see some nuance.
It's a lot more emotional.
Yeah, it seems a lot more emotional to me than, buying a product, although, depending on what product you're trying to drive, I guess, it's something like really impacting people's lives. But I think in recruiting, I think it's a bit more personal and probably why I got into it, right? Like I love understanding why. I think you have a psych degree too, right? I think you mentioned, right? So I think it's all about like understanding why people make decisions. And again, it's not always completely rational. It's partly emotional, partly rational. So like, but it seems more interesting to me to think about like the non-rational ways that people make decisions and trying to kind of influence that. Totally. Influence it, but also like understand it really, try to play a role. Because I think if you think about a recruiter's job, it's like, if you're not influencing in some way, then you're kind of not doing your job, right? Like there is a part of it that you are influencing a candidate. You just want to do it in a way that still respects the candidate's autonomy and your company as well and represents well. But there is a factor of like trying to influence someone on a major life decision by interacting with them for a few hours, which is pretty incredible.
Totally. My last question on this, which just popped into my mind when you were saying stuff about like life circumstances. Have you ever spoken to anyone, like anyone's partner or parents, about an offer?
Definitely have. And it's, to me, it's so key to think about who are the decision makers or who are the potential influences on a decision being made besides just the candidate. So when I was doing university hiring at times, I think I was moonlighting as a university recruiter at Airbnb because it was all hands on deck when we were in university season. So high volume. But I remember getting on a call with a candidate's parent and talking to them about the opportunity and just discussing that. And that was a cool experience. The candidate actually ended up joining Airbnb, but it showed me that you kind of have to be willing to do everything. Like you have to, as a recruiter, you kind of have to be flexible and again, I'm like working all ends. Like, and totally. Maybe that's always been my stance as a recruiter. Like I will go to the distance. I will do the extra thing And oftentimes
You're
I'll differentiate.
you're definitely not talking to someone's parents if you're selling a SaaS product.
I know, yeah, probably not. It'd be a different type of SaaS product, but
yeah, I've talked to a lot of partners. It kind of feels like a lot of pressure though, because you're like, oh gosh, like this person has concerns, and that obviously impacts the candidates' concerns and their outcomes and things like that. Especially, I've talked to candidates a lot about stability because they have a partner and families and things like that. So it's definitely you feel a bit in the hot seat for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. But what strikes me as a recruiter, like, we have to be able to go there, talk about the details or dive in. Like, I get questions all the time now about equity and other pieces that I might have to go into. Like, I will go ask the question, I will go try to get the information because I want people to be informed about making the decision. Again, like, my worst fear would be someone joining and then realizing, like, I was sold, like, this is not what I was sold. Like, that's my worst fear as a recruiter. So, like, I would rather put everything out there on the table, including talking to your partner, in order to get that done and be totally transparent. So I think that you see those edge cases sometimes, and it's always interesting.
Yeah, we'll get to your hot take here in a second, but on offer acceptance, my hot take is if you're too aggressive about, selling the candidate just to get an offer accept, you are doing a disservice to your company, you're doing a disservice to the candidate, you're doing a disservice to yourself because you may have to open the role. Soon after the role closes, they may keep looking. So yeah, like, you really have to keep the candidate in mind. And it's definitely a balancing act between the business and the candidate. And I think the best recruiters do that more seamlessly.
Yeah, I think early on in your career, you're really just like, you're trying to get your numbers, right? You're just trying to get the offer accept to show that you're valuable. I think that what separates the really good recruiters and people who really make it long term, they kind of release that and say, like, hey, like, if I have to get my numbers by, like, hard selling every candidate and selling them, like, not the truth, like, I'm not willing to do that. So I'm going to go into it with a more, hey, like, here's the opportunity. I'm going to, my job to really give you all the information that you need in order to make your decision and let the chips lie, right? I just want to make sure that I give the candidate the right information and the amount they need. But I think, yeah, you're right. If you go too hard, even if you get the candidate, then you're right. Like, what are they going to do when they get there? Yeah, it doesn't feel good. And I think that, like, I want to be able to sleep at night. So I think that's an important part, is just being upfront, honest, and letting go of just making the numbers is not really long-term, I think, going to get you far, especially if you're burning bridges along the way. That gets around. I've seen it happen.
Recruiters love to goss.
Oh yeah. I mean, I go, hey, that person, like, they really hit their numbers, but underneath, they kind of crossed everyone to do it, or they were like, the hires really weren't that successful. Like, that gets around. So it's a small world in recruiting, for sure. Smaller than you realize. Yeah, everyone knows each other.
Well, I would love to hear about, what does hiring excellence mean to you?
Hiring excellence mean to me. So I kind of highlighted a little bit before, but I think if you're really good over the long term at hiring the right people at the right time in the right role, you're doing well. You're hiring well. So hiring excellence really is about optimizing your processes, your people, rallying around the whole team around this mission, right? Which is to really attract and hire really, really talented people over the long term. And that might mean you're not hiring as fast. Like, I want to be real. Like, hiring excellence doesn't mean hiring quickly. Hiring excellence is hiring the right people. And I think that will shine more than, again, like, getting volume. I think it's more about having the right people at the right time in the right role.
100%, which that could be a mild take, considering that some people think hiring excellence is all about speed, but speed without quality, without match, like a good match, is just a disaster. I've seen it.
Yeah, I've been there. I've done, and you get pressure to do that fast. But that's very important, I think, to build a full lineup of metrics that you look at beyond just volume, but efficiency, quality, diversity. Like there's
So
so
many
many
things.
things. Maybe I should add that. Hiring the right people at the right time in the right role. Maybe hiring the right people means hiring a diverse team. So I'll include
Totally.
that.
Good insert. Good footnote. My final question, and my very favorite, is what is your recruiting hot take? Which I imagine, especially after working with a lot of portfolio companies and seeing like just a huge spectrum of recruiting processes, you probably have a good one.
Yes. Hopefully. I don't know. I think I kind of thought about it, and I mean, this is really, really timely because of headcount planning. But I would say like most companies probably should not do a yearly headcount plan. At this point, every company I've been to, I don't think there's one that actually got it right ever. And so yes, I think if it makes finance comfortable, you should probably project out. But in terms of an input into recruiting, I think there should be shorter cycles that are probably quarterly, and also more flexibility with the recruiting team, meaning like less full time and more contractors that are able to flex in and out. There's dangers in that. I mean, I've heard, obviously horror stories about like 50% contingent teams, things like that. But I think the times we're in now, I feel like there needs to be way more flexibility to adjust to business. And the business is so turbulent right now that I think that's why I think headcount planning yearly I think it might be going out the window. I never had a company do it right.
Well, then you hire a bunch of recruiters for the headcount, and then you have to let them go, and it's a freaking fiasco.
Exactly.
Nobody wants that.
Like, well, we thought we were hiring this many, but turns out it's this, or maybe attrition way higher, and then now you're like scrambling to figure out a team. But that's again like if you did it on a shorter cycle where like we knew a quarter ahead and had a more flexible team, you could kind of adjust for it rather than like hiring a full-time team. And I think a lot of the pain that we felt over the past few years was because the companies just hired way too many recruiters for what they needed, given the macro conditions that were coming out. And not everyone could predict it, but I think it just means that we need to scenario plan better, and also maybe have more flexible team makeups in the future.
Even with headcount planning, it's surprising how many companies are like, okay, we're hiring a zillion people this year, but not one single person on the headcount plan is a recruiter.
You're like, okay, so who's going to hire these people?
Like, okay, this sounds great. Yeah, who's gonna do this? Just wondering, just curious.
Yeah. And then you look at the cost of that, right? Because I think that goes into like the cost planning. So you need to kind of sit that. That's why recruiting needs to sit at the table way before, way earlier. I think recruiting should be involved thinking about, hiring plans, thinking about attrition, thinking about like teams. Because
how many companies don't plan for attrition?
No, yeah, they don't even put it in. They're like, okay, like we're gonna just have this steady state and we're gonna grow 20%, but like you're gonna lose 10% of your company. So that's really a 30% hiring plan. I think also like they treat a hire as a head as a head, when like a head count, like an exec head count is way different than like an IC design head count. So like really planning based on each function, and like that requires a different amount of recruiting support as well. So there's a lot of sophistication that you can really go into. And if you do have like obviously a company that's able to get into that, then yes, keep account planning. That should be great. But I just think that for a lot of companies, just again, as a financial input, maybe, but like as a recruiting input.
Yeah, as a financial projection, it makes total sense. But otherwise, I think like you're saying, shorter cycle of planning, flexibility within the recruiting team, having contingency folks, versus FTEs, like all of that makes all the difference. But yeah, thinking about it strategically is a big factor in the success. Otherwise, there's a little value.
Yeah, it's not worthwhile. And actually,
I was thinking of a way to say it nicely.
Yeah, no, a lot of time being put into it with not much value, to be honest with you. So
totally.
Sorry, I know I never probably ruffle a few feathers within again, finance and ops, but it's reality.
Ruffle them.
Yeah, let's do it. Why not?
Amazing. Well, we are coming up on our time here. Where should people go to learn more about you more about Bain?
So my LinkedIn, I'm Reggie Williams on there. You can probably search me and I'll pop up. I'm at Bain Capital Ventures. And then Bain Capital Ventures also has a website. Again, you can just put in Bain Capital Ventures. And then we also have like our jobs page there. We have links to things, our portfolio company, so you can kind of take a look. And then again, LinkedIn is the best way to get in contact with me. I have
he's a top voice, y'all.
I'm on there, top voice. So please, find me and hopefully have a conversation on there.
Awesome. Great. Your content is amazing on LinkedIn. So I hope folks hear this and start following you. But thank you so much again for joining us on Offer Accepted. We really appreciate you spending time with us today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Offer Accepted, the podcast for ambitious recruiting professionals, brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and share with your TA community. We'll see you next time.